One last little snippet from the Gungors. This is Lisa Gungor. She and her husband, Michael, very popular songwriters. They were from the New Apostolic Reformation bent. Wouldn't you say so, Joey?
I'd say they were a little bit more of your traditional charismatic / megachurch seeker.
Okay, but she
world.
said that she liked all the wackiness and the zaniness.
Yeah, the old school holy roller Pentecostal style.
Okay. All right. Fair enough, but it's getting really close. Nevertheless, demonstrating that they were never a part of the faith, they left the faith. And I thought her interview with BuzzFeed, this is interesting because this was an informal practicing of church discipline. Nevertheless, it should have had the same effect if they were among us.
When Lucy was born, we had this huge social media blow up. And there's stories in magazines and all over the internet about our heresy. And we were completely pushed out of the church world, of this tribe that we really loved, and really painful and devastating at so many times.
Yeah, it should have caught their attention and caused them to go, wait a second, we are woefully wrong here. We need to repent and run back to shelter, run back to the Lord. Instead, they're now going about the business of trying to persuade everybody else, hey, join us in our apostasy.
I know a lot of people are still in this very conservative, fundamental bubble, and they can be so afraid to break out of that for fear of what will happen to their lives. And this happens in any religion. So my dream is that we're not so afraid.
Mm-hmm. Now, she's working as an ambassador of darkness. Very, very sad. The results of bad churches, bad theology, bad teaching, and bad accountability, which leads us now to irresistible, reclaiming the new that Jesus unleashed for the world. Not a great sentence from an individual who is a very good communicator. The new, not
like
the new covenant,
new?
apparently just
GNU?
Voila, not like bah, which is, I think, the sound a GNU makes, if I'm not mistaken.
Works for me, I don't know enough.
Yep.
Gary
Reclaiming
talked in
the
English, so I
new
don't know.
that Jesus unleashed for the world. In other words, get rid of the old and just claim the new. This is a teaching that is going to lead more Gungors astray. It's interesting because Andy Stanley, I think he fancies himself an intellectual, a scientist. I doubt he's a young earther. No science to make his claims. We're losing people because we've been too hitched to the Old Testament. Where's the data for that? I don't see any. In fact, I might suggest to you the opposite is true because I doubt that Andy has preached an Old Testament book perhaps ever. I'm sorry. I've met plenty of people who go to his church, and they are less theologically astute than Lisa Gungor. I have asked many of them, what is the gospel? I mean, that's the most basic thing. I mean, if I wanted to push it, hey, where do you find Jesus in the Old Testament? But they don't even know the very basics. So several reviews have been flying out now. This one from Marvin Olansky. Is it Olansky or Olansky?
Olansky.
Olansky.
No ends.
No N.
Marvin Olansky.
Well, there is an N in Marvin.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is an N in Marvin, but Olansky. Its
No N in
first 80
Olansky.
pages winsomely and validly critique vanilla church life. Pot meet kettle. Kettle, pot. Wow. He's critiquing. That's like me critiquing scrawny, tall guys that do radio programs. Wait a second. Aren't you a tall, scrawny guy who does a radio program? Well, yeah, I'm just critiquing what they do. Stanley's complaints get more pointed on page 90 when he complains about Old Testament leftovers. He clarifies this on page 137. Quote, get ready for this, please. Do not let Ray Comfort hear this. His head will explode. The 10 Commandments have no authority over you. None. To be clear, thou shalt not obey the 10 Commandments. Look, that is so sloppy and so dangerous and so reckless. You know, like God's love. Reckless. No, that's not that kind of reckless. It's a different. By the way, hold on. The Reckless song dominated the 2018 GMA Dove Awards. Just so you know. Mr. Reckless Love earned doves for Song of the Year, Worship Song of the Year, and Worship Album of the Year. What a privilege this is. Isn't it just like the Lord to take our failures and our overall jacked up mess and turn it into something beautiful? He takes our disappointments and turns them into a dance floor. He allows us to be kids again. Not a single word of that sentence was biblically sound. So Pastor Stanley, my apologies, Pastor Stanley has determined that he wants to get rid of the Ten Commandments. He wants to get rid of the Old Testament. Once again, this is where sound theology comes in. I recognize there can be some variance in our understanding of the Old Testament laws. It's a somewhat complex situation that we have to deal with. That covenant is gone, and yet clearly we shouldn't be murdering people, committing adultery, blaspheming God's name. So how do we get the principles from the old into the new? By the way, we tackle that in Herman Who, which will be available in December 1st. In time for Christmas.
I'll believe it when I see it.
You'll just see it, Mr. Doubting Thomas. That the Herman Who resource, 12 lessons long, will at least explain the valid ways of getting the old over to the new. How do we do that? Because the old isn't the new. We do have a better covenant. That is true. But that doesn't mean, oh, well, just close the book on that side. There's nothing over there. There's nothing we can learn. Oh, really? How's about the moral precepts of God? Here are the 3 ways of handling Old Testament laws. Pick your favorite. Each one of them has challenges. Nevertheless, you could say that the Old Testament laws were broken into 3 columns: civil, moral, ceremonial. I don't see that division, but if you choose to do it that way, I think you're going to run into some problems, but I think it's at least a valid way of approaching those. You could say that there's just 3 different types of laws. Again, the Bible never makes that distinction itself. It mingles them all together. However, if you want to do that, okay. The civil laws are gone because we're not Israel. The ceremonial laws are gone because they were all pointing to Jesus. The moral laws still exist. Well, there are some problems with that. We don't put fences around our roofs. So you have to see, you got to do, what do we do with those types of laws? The other way that you can deal with Old Testament laws is to say all of the Old Testament laws apply unless the New Testament gives them a thumbs down. Again, I think you're going to run into problems with that because it doesn't really cover everything that can cause some complications and some gotchas. Third way, this happens to be the way that I think is best to deal with Old Testament laws. They're all gone. They're just all gone unless the New Testament affirms them. And guess what? The New Testament does affirm them. Furthermore, there's a hermeneutical principle that God's moral precepts never change. See, that's how I would get there with these laws. That there are moral principles that are unchanging. And so I can bring all of those principles forward. I can still get something out of the fence around the roof. What is it? That I need to build a fence? No. That I need to make sure that my domicile is safe for people to inhabit or visit. That's the principle. I can bring that forward. When your ox scores a neighbor, probably not going to happen. What's the lesson? Make sure your animals are good to people, or you better keep them away from people, because if you don't and you knew about it, you need to be making sure that you're taking responsibility for your pets. That would be a principle that I believe you could bring forward. That's the way we deal with Old Testament laws. Andy's method seems to be, well, let me just read it to you. The 10 Commandments have no authority over you, none, to be clear. Thou shalt not obey the 10 Commandments. Does the law have authority over us anymore? No. In that it cannot condemn us. Yes, in that we want to keep those laws because it represents the character and the nature of God. That's why we desire to keep the laws, and that's why we need a system to figure out what do we do with these Old Testament laws? How do we bring them forward? How do you bring forward any of these stories? What are the principles? And it's all basic hermeneutics, which is indeed very, very basic. And we will be releasing Herman who? Mr. Negative Nelly?
Uh-huh.
December, can I call you Nelly?
You can. I just don't know if you want the consequences.
Well, these days, apparently, we don't have to respect the genders when it comes to God being a male pronoun. So I don't know that I need to respect your pronouns. Joey, what is the prescription of one Andy Stanley who's irresistible is now in the stands? Next on Wretched Radio.